to this conversation to join us on the stage. Come on in. He did not accept this invitation. So before we start the conversation, it is important that we acknowledge that we are sitting, standing, residing, resting on the traditional territories of the people of Turtle Island. This land is the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, So this territory, this land, is of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations of this land. And there was a commitment that the Canadian state and this land be peacefully shared and cared for the resources around the Great Lakes. This was a promise, I believe, that the Canadian state broke. It is a privilege to be here and to be in solidarity with Indigenous peoples in this country in the continuing struggle against colonization and its lasting impacts. I would like to acknowledge that we here who came after our treaty peoples, including those of us who came here as migrants, as settlers in this generation and or in generation past. And those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade as stolen people to a stolen land. This acknowledgement, I think must be made tangible through our work in solidarity with Indigenous people's fight against colonization and for rights to land, sovereignty, and good health. Miigwech and welcome. So this is an important conversation. And I have a few opening remarks, and then we will be introduced to the candidates who will participate in this conversation. So as I said, it's an important forum that has been organized by over 60 groups of community agencies and networks who have created the Toronto Housing Pledge, and who are asking all the Toronto mayor candidates and councillor candidates to speak to and with us about how they will address Toronto's affordable housing and homelessness crisis. This is an opportunity for us to find out which candidates are committed to making Torontonians' right to housing a reality. As you are able, raise your hand or indicate if you have difficulty paying your rent or if you know someone who have a housing affordability challenge. Indicate if you currently or in the past know someone who has been supported by living in affordable rent-geared-to-income housing. You are here because this issue holds both personal and political interests, and that means that we bring passion and we bring strident commitment to speaking to the conversation and the issues that will be presented. But we also know that this conversation may also hold some differences. And I fully expect that as a participatory audience, that you will be strident and passionate. I ask that you bring generosity of spirit in how we engage each other, that we hold ourselves and each other accountable for maintaining a space that is free from discrimination, from discriminatory comments, and that where we challenge, we do so respectfully. So by way of some remarks, housing, many of us in this room have fought for many years and continue to fight for housing as a fundamental human right. Decent, affordable housing should not be a luxury and a privilege for some, but a right for all in the city. Unfortunately, half of Toronto renters are spending more than 30% of their household income on housing. Young, working poor, newcomers are being forced out of the city, and homelessness has been even greater. It's a crisis that affects all of us. Women and families are able to find a safe and lasting home, closed door for Indigenous folks, racialized and LGBTQ peoples, and the unsuitable conditions of housing conditions for people with disabilities. In this city alone, in this Toronto, there are over 96,000 individuals on the waiting list for Toronto community housing, with a 10-year wait list. There are approximately over 5,000 people in Toronto who are homeless the last street count, with nearly 3,200 people on waiting lists for supportive housing. The homeless are often survivors of violence, suffer poor health, and higher incidences of suicide, with the greatest portion of those who are homeless being children, youth, Indigenous peoples, new immigrants, and refugees. These are the communities whose voices and whose interests we are here to speak to and speak about. As a worker in the health and community services sector, decent, affordable, and safe housing is an absolute foundation for good health. Without appropriate and secure housing, our health and mental health suffer. Struggling to pay the rent makes us even much more stressed. It's a high blood pressure recipe. It pressures us to accept low quality housing and can force us to skip food and medication because we need to pay for housing. That's right. Many in the city are made sick or sickness made worse because they lack decent, affordable housing. This is avoidable with good planning and political will to act. We have a housing affordability crisis. When we look at the sky in this city, we see what we hear as development. We see a plethora of condo development. And what we see is we see a lack in housing stock that is affordable for those of us who need affordable housing. We see luxury condo development when, as I said, we see a lack of affordable housing stock. And to illustrate, just last week, there was an advertisement for a quote-unquote 200 square foot micro suite in Parkdale is going for only $1,600 a month. We need equity in our city planning processes and regulatory tools to increase the affordable housing supply. We need a mayor and candidates who will say yes to affordable housing in my backyard. because they believe that cities must be a home and belong to all of us.
Yes.
Not just those of us who are well resourced in them. So, this is the conversation ahead of us. So for those of you who have questions, review them. We want questions, not long statements. Those of you who have statements, hold them for an after conversation. And we move into this part of the conversation. So the agencies administering this forum review, and folks have asked, so how is it that we have invited, who we have invited to this table? So the agencies administering the forum reviewed the publicly available platforms of all 35 mayoral candidates.
Wow.
They chose the 4 candidates who had the strongest housing policies, hence the invited candidates we have.
Not possible. I am the most celebrated homeless man in the history of the city of Toronto.
Yes.
And if you look in today's Snap downtown, you will see Kevin Mark Clark, your mayoral candidate, with 9 other city council candidates for a homeless memorial. So
Kevin, I'm going to say,
I am the most celebrated housing advocate.
Kevin, you have been a strong advocate. You have been a relentless advocate.
I have been an awesome
and Kevin, I am going to
advocate
ask you if we can just continue.
Yes,
Thank you, my brother. Thank
One
you.
love.
So we have Sarah, who has been involved in advocacy in the city of Toronto on issues of transportation and safety, and have held positions at the World Wildlife Fund and the Black Creek Transportation Management Association. Welcome, Sarah.
One love.
We have Sarah Selassie, who is a lawyer and activist, once named in Chatelet's Toronto 80 amazing Canadian women to watch. Yay! Welcome, Sarah. We have Jennifer Kisma. Until 2017 September, she was the city planner of the city and recently held the position of the CEO of Creative Housing. Welcome, Jennifer. And we had invited Mayor Tory, the current mayor, who won the last election in 2014 and who was the former Ontario Conservative Party leader until 2009. Though Mayor Tory has stated that affordable housing is the centerpiece of his second term as mayor, he declined the invitation on Friday. And did not sign the housing pledge. The housing pledge. The housing pledge. This housing pledge. The housing pledge was put together by over 60 agencies and tenant groups in this city, and the aim of ensuring that the next council takes 5 practical steps towards stopping the housing crisis and making Toronto a fairer and more equitable city for all of us. 35% of the candidates in the election have signed the pledge. More than half of current incumbent city councillors running again have also signed. All invited candidates have signed except the mayor. We also have at the stage as well Dion, another candidate in this election who was not part of this group of selected mayoral candidates to engage in this debate. Dion has taken a seat at the front, and I'm sure as we proceed, Dion will have some statements for us, and we will manage and move the process forward.
The people select the candidates, not you.
No.
The people choose them.
That's right. That's right.
The people choose the candidates. So what I'm asking, hello. So folks have come here to have an important conversation, and everybody who is sitting here is committed to having a conversation about affordable housing and homelessness. So I am asking that you respect the space and give this opportunity to respond to the questions. So I am asking those who are standing and shouting over the process to respect the
No
process.
police. If Faith Goldie wants to debate, I will debate Faith Goldie. Now, John Tory may be afraid to debate you all. But if Faith Goldie wants to debate, I will debate Faith Goldie.
Time out. Yeah. So I am going to ask.
But not a fourth?
So this is another candidate, Chris Lengenfeld.
Move the seats around them. They want to move? Let them move. Go ahead. Leave.
Faith Goldie, any candidate
The
for the
process
race for
was
mayor.
that
I will debate
individuals,
any
people
of you
who have chosen
publicly.
to
Because
participate
I
in this
am the
debate.
people's candidate. And this election is only about three in one. Number one, number two, and number three. Sorry, there's a fourth. Our army is strong and the children are strong. And we will restore government back to the people of this city and to you, children of this city.
Just like 4 years ago.
My sweat, my heart, my
And do you see what they just did? They got up and walked off the stage.
What's the point?
They got up and walked off the stage.
Faith Goldie or Mr. Tory. So anybody who wants to debate affordable housing, get to the stage.
I've been fighting for housing. What happened today, I
As
know
a member of the grassroots community.
I know he has to lecture you, but what happened here today,
I think we leave
beyond where she is. I think we leave beyond where she is.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you, darling. No, I know.
I know, but now she's just on the motion.
spirited people coming to spirited issues with deep passion and deep commitment. The conversation, we have shifted slightly the format. So there are 5 predetermined questions that the organizers have decided to put to the candidates that we had agreed on. So what the decision is that those 5 predetermined questions will be put to the 4 candidates who have been invited, and as well that those additional mayoral candidates who are in the room will be asked to give a statement speaking to the issues. So that has been the compromise that we have come to. It may not be the one that works for everyone, but I hope it's one that works enough for us to move forward with having this conversation and not losing this moment around holding our candidates accountable to speaking back to us about issues of housing and homelessness. So, as the candidates that we will start with, Saron Gabi Selassie, I will invite Saron to come to the stage here. And Saron is on the stage here. And to both, one, introduce herself, and then we will take those 5 predetermined questions from the floor, and we have individuals who are in the audience who are poised to ask those questions. So when you ask your question, I will also ask you to introduce yourself. And remember, you have 2 minutes to respond to each question. No more. You can take less, but no more.
I want to thank the organizers for organizing tonight, and I can't believe how many of our campaign organizers and members packed this room. Thank you, and please give a round of applause to yourselves for amazing organizing. I also think it's very telling that John Tory's condominium is all of 1 minute from here, and he couldn't find the time to be here. But what's more telling to me is that Jennifer Keesmaat left the building.
Oh no!
She's following Elvis.
I have said over and over and over again that John Tory and Jennifer Keesmaat are not championing working class people in the city of Toronto. And Jennifer's absence right now, despite the fact that we have so many of our community members, so many first-time voters, so many migrants, housing advocates, so many people who have put their lives on hold to be here tonight, and that exodus and exit from the building should tell each and every single one of us, this is no progressive champion for the people of the city.
Hey!
También yo quiero dar mis saludos a la comunidad hispana donde están hoy. My position on housing has been clear. I have indicated that affordable housing is my priority. I have indicated that I will declare a state of emergency on housing. Under the previous administration, we all know through the Housing Opportunities Toronto plan, under the John and Tory and Jennifer Keesmaat, they failed working class people in the city, did not deliver on the Housing Opportunities Toronto plan, did not build the 10,000 units that were promised, didn't even achieve half of that. But now the people are supposed to buy into a false progressive campaign that's saying, I'm going to build 100,000 units. I do not believe it for one moment. We need an authentic champion for working class people in the city of Toronto. And as I said, I couldn't be prouder to advocate for affordable housing. I know Toronto was outraged. but I am so confident with our big organizing, we will defeat the machinery of John Tory and Jennifer Keys-Matt and build a city for working class people.
Thank you. So we have some questions for you, Cyril, from the floor. And the first question is from Taya Greenberg from Sistru.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. So as Angela mentioned, the 2013 Street Needs Assessment homeless count enumerated 5,300 homeless folks in the city of Toronto. There's recently been completed a 2018 homeless count. They haven't released the numbers. They'll release them after their election. Our understanding is that the number of homeless folks that's been enumerated has nearly doubled. So that the Street Needs Assessment has counted almost 9,000 people. Our shelter system is at capacity. We're in crisis, particularly in the women's and family sectors. I think we know that the current administration has scapegoated refugees, and I think some of that we've seen kind of what that kind of narrative can do in the last couple of weeks with the violence that ensued. So our question to the candidates is both about policy and then about how you'll communicate about homelessness to the public. So what are the concrete policy directions you'll provide to address the shelter crisis and prevent people from entering or re-entering shelters? And then in the context of the shelter crisis, how will you present the issues of homelessness to the public in a way that avoids scapegoating and its ensuing violence and engenders a compassionate and inclusive response?
In this room, I get a sense we're all on the same page. I signed the housing pledge proudly, and that we already, yes, absolutely, and we already have the answer. I completely support the call to expand our shelter system. We are on the same page here, and the issue that we've also been facing, if I may add on, is the mass exodus of asylum seekers that are now precariously housed in the city of Toronto, which has yet to be taken up in this election. And so to answer your question, we're all housing, I get the sense this is a room of housing activists. So really the question is, how will we collectively mobilize to ensure that this is actually a top priority come like during the election and during this campaign? But I 100% support the housing pledge and will fulfill that commitment.
We have a second question from Acorn, Canada, Alejandro Ruiz Vargas.
Thank you. So, the city currently defines affordable housing as anything at or below average market rent. Given that average market rent had exceeded $1,200 for a one-bedroom unit and $1,400 for a two-bedroom unit. Between 2005 and 2015, one-bedroom apartment rent increased by 20%. Almost all of Toronto renters households living in affordable housing, spending more than 30% of their income on rent. So can you commit to bringing the city's definition on affordable housing in the line with the provincial and federal definitions, which are tied to income rather than market rent?
I want every single person in this room to know that Jennifer Keys-Matt thinks 80% of housing of market rate is affordable housing. This is why I'm saying I am the progressive alternative, not Jennifer Keys-Matt. I completely support a definition of deeply affordable housing. 80% of market rate is nowhere near affordable, and I stand 100% behind a definition that is rent geared to income.
We have a third question for you, Sharon, from Rob Field, from the Federation of Metro Tenants Association.
You got the mic. I don't need it. Hi. I'm the new chair of the Federation of Metro Tenants Associations. In the pledge at number 4, it talks about ensuring new residential development includes everyone. And as we've seen tonight, we know that everyone is not being included now.
Right.
So the question that I would have, the City of Toronto is able to build rental units by itself, incentivize the construction of rental units by the profit and non-profit sector, and or use inclusionary zoning powers to force developers to make a percentage of their units affordable in their projects. So as a candidate, how will you use inclusionary zoning provisions to ensure that those developers are also building those units in their developments?
Thank you for your question, and I want to say I'm a proud past supporter of the Federation of Metro Tenants Association and the incredible tenants legal helpline that is incredible. If you have any tenant eviction questions, call the hotline. They will come through. I am calling for inclusionary zoning. I said that all developers need to have at least 30% allocated for inclusionary zoning as a minimum bar. And once again, I want to say with if you pay attention to this race and to the politics, you'll see that my opponents are not calling for that, and that under Jennifer's plan, and this is why I'm taking time to point this out, is because she gets the largest platform. She has a lot larger platform in the city, is calling for basically selling off a lot of our lands to developers. And so I stand, I'm very critical of that, and I stand 100% behind inclusionary zoning.
And the final question from the organizers is from Emily Paradis from Building a Better Lower Dufferin. Emily.
Thanks to the organizers. I'm a housing researcher and advocate, but I'm also the co-chair of a residents group in my neighborhood, Build a Better Lower Dufferin. In 2015, 7.5 acres of public school land in Lower Dufferin was sold by Toronto Lands Corporation to the highest bidder, with no enforceable requirement for affordable housing on the site. And the current proposal for the site is for 2,000 plus unaffordable condos. We believe this was a missed opportunity to use publicly owned land to create a housing that's affordable and accessible to women-led households, racialized and immigrant communities, people with disabilities, and others who are shut out of Toronto's market-dominated housing system. And we can't afford to miss any more opportunities like this one. So our question is, if you're elected mayor, how would you use the next year, 2019, to mobilize Toronto's resources, land, money, borrowing capacity, zoning, and regulatory powers to increase Toronto's affordable housing supply? And at the end of the year, what would be the marker that would show that you were on the right track?
Well, first off, I want to say that I've called for consultation with First Nations communities when we're repurposing city lands. As you probably have heard, the Supreme Court has struck down the duty to consult rights recently in Ottawa, and in the question of repurposing our lands, I have been very vocal about that. So that's a priority for me, is that we have First Nations communities at the table and we're consulting on how we will repurpose city lands.
Woo! Yeah!
And I said, again, I've signed the housing pledge. We need to go all in. We all know the answer. We cannot rely just on the private sector. That will not reap the results we're looking for. We need to mobilize all of our resources. We need to look at all of the city lands that are presently unused, and the position around repurposing golf courses for sports centers and recreation centers, I have come out against and said, actually, first we need to consult First Nations peoples, and secondly, priority number one needs to be affordable housing, not a sports center.
Mayoral for taking the first series of questions. Now, as for anybody who came in later, you'll see that the format has changed, that we're asking each of the candidates to come up and to respond to a series of questions, and this will be before we open the space up for questions from the floor. So the next candidate up is Sarah Clemenham. Yes? Sarah will both introduce herself and then respond to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for staying, because I know it was kind of crazy there at the beginning, but it's such an important issue. Housing and transportation are the two issues that are going to make or break our city. So we have to be talking about it clearly and together, all of us together. I'm running for mayor because I see the problems that you are all seeing and that many of you are experiencing. And I wanted to thank you very much, not just to the organizers, but to the people in this room, because really the gains, any gains that we make on affordable housing and on social justice, they come because of you. They do not come because of the politicians in office, from what I see. It comes from the pressure from the people, and then the government follows. I'd like the government to lead. Imagine if your energy could be used towards building, not fighting cuts. And I went through the budget process this year. So many of you were out there saying, please don't take away the school nutrition programs. Please fund the poverty reduction strategy. We shouldn't have to be asking for those things. Our government should want it too. I was lucky in 2000. I was looking for an apartment, and the rents at that time were similar to a mortgage, and I was able to scrape together the funds with help from my community to buy a house in 2000. Now I have 3 children, and I know, of course, they're never going to be able to buy a house, but I'm concerned they're not even going to be able to find an apartment. I would let them live with me. I would be happy for my kids to live with me, but I know they're probably going to want to move out. Their choice is either going to be to move out of the city or to pursue a job that they don't have an interest in. You can't get a normal job and live in Toronto anymore, and it's going to get worse. So I think the solutions are all there. I think we all know about them. I don't have new ideas or new solutions. I just want to follow the ones that exist. All we need is political will and funding, and that's what I'd like to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are starting with a series of questions and take.
Yes, you can hear my voice a lot. So, as mentioned, our shelter system is at capacity. We're in crisis. The current administration has wholly inadequately responded to the crisis. John Tory's administration did nothing for years as homeless folks, community activists, primary care providers spoke again and again about the degree of overcrowding in our shelter system. In fact, he only acted when his feet were held to the fire this past winter. The response from the administration has been totally inadequate. They're opening up domes this winter that are temporary domes, respite centers that will warehouse over 100 people at a time. We know that this approach is totally inadequate for complex folks. Also, in the context of the opiate crisis, we know that large spaces where you can't actually do one-on-one work with folks is a totally inadequate response. What concrete policy directions would you provide to address the shelter crisis and prevent folks from re-entering the shelter system, and how will you present the issue to the public in a way that avoids scapegoating and engenders a compassionate and inclusive response? Thanks.
We need to take short, medium, and long-term actions. And so the short term is just making sure that there is shelter. So people are not dying on our streets in the 13th wealthiest city in the world, basically. So we need to take concrete action to take care of people in the short term. We need to make sure shelters are not over 90% capacity. We need to make sure they are safe for people, that they are comfortable, they are dignified, and we need to make sure we've got heat and cold alerts happening appropriately so that we can move into action quickly. So that's the short term, but nobody wants to live in a shelter. We know that shelters aren't the long-term solution. They're a stopgap and they're necessary. We can't ignore them, but we need to look at the housing. I'm a real supporter of housing first. So we get people housing before we try and expect them to fix all their problems. You can't fix your problems if you don't have a roof over your head, if you don't have somewhere to go home at night. So we need to work on housing first, and we need to have not just the housing for the people, but the supportive staff, outreach workers who can actually, make that transition happen. And then we just need to invest in affordable housing. And so what I would do to get public buy-in is what I talk about. First of all, I don't want a city where we accept it. And that's what we have right now. Outside of City Hall, on each corner, there are someone who is sleeping on the street. That's outside of City Hall. Outside of the financial district, on the sidewalk, there are people who are sleeping on the street. There are people who are basically dying right away in front of our eyes. And so we are conditioning this response in our people to ignore it, to feel bad, or to feel judgmental. Both don't help anybody, certainly not the person on the street. So I would really I try to tell people about how we have to invest in our city, because if we invest in our people now, we're actually going to not only save people's lives, but improve our city in the future. And we're already paying. We're paying for prisons. We're paying for hospitals. We're paying for park maintenance because people are living in our parks. We need to house people. That's so much better for the people. And frankly, it's better for the tax base. So it's a win-win situation to take care of the people who are experiencing homelessness and to take care of our housing situation.
Thank you. So I asked Greg Sutton from the Wellesley Institute. Is Greg in the house?
Thanks, Senator. One of the priorities in the TO Housing Pledge is sustainable funding for Toronto community housing. So this year and most years, the city provides TCHC about $230 million in rent and mortgage subsidies. And this year, and this is kind of like a bit of a one-time spike, it's providing $160 million for capital repairs, major repairs. But there's no long-term plan for the city's ongoing subsidies, and no multi-year budget for that capital funding. What's your plan for sustainable funding for Toronto community housing?
Well, I mean, my plan is to fund it. It's not a magic formula. It's that we have to pay for it. And frankly, the money to pay for the housing we need is a fraction of the cost of the money to deal with the problems that come from not having enough housing. I mean, Toronto community housing, it's shameful, the state of repair that's in right now. But we are facing, and Toronto community housing has said this itself, an eviction of people from almost 60,000 units. I mean, we think we have a housing problem in Toronto now. What's going to happen when these 60,000 units are shut down because they're in such a critical state of disrepair? And the only answer is to fund it. And frankly, we fund things all the time. We have $11 million budget annually. A few $100 million to house people is a critical need. There should be no question about that. So it's to fund it. You know, we can look at our budget and see if we can move things around. Politicians always talk about making our government better and making it more efficient. We've tried that, and I've never seen anything but cuts. I haven't seen improvement. So I would like to see, yes, we'll look at our budget and we'll see if we can move money around, but if we can't, we are going to have to raise revenue. And we're going to have to we're a wealthy city. Wealthy people, middle class people, all sorts of people have the money to contribute. Toronto has the lowest property taxes in Ontario. We are not funding what our needs. And so the only way we're going to have housing is if we fund it. The only way we're going to fund it is to commit to either finding the revenue, and if we don't find it, to raising it. It's a necessity.
So we're going to illustrate the question because you know the situation like the rest of the housing. So can you commit to bringing the city's definition of affordable housing in line with the provincial and federal definition, which are led to income rather than market rent?
Yes, I absolutely can commit to that, and I think we have to be honest. I mean, I hear talk about we're keeping the city affordable by keeping property taxes low. Whose definition of affordable is that? That's not most people's definition of affordable. Affordable is if you can afford your rent. Affordable is if you can afford transit. Affordable is if you can access parks, community centers, libraries, green space, sports, arts programming. So I absolutely commit to that. We have to define what affordable really is, not what affordable is to someone who is making six figures. Affordable to what the average person is. An affordable rent is not $2,500 a month. It's just not. So I absolutely commit to that, and I think, we have to be honest. Let's just be honest about what affordability is. It's that simple.
Rob Fee.
back to inclusionary zoning again. The city has the power to implement inclusionary zoning. So the question is, of course, how will you use that to ensure that developers are also building affordable units in their developments?
So, yeah, I commit to inclusionary zoning. To 25% is what I put in my platform, but whatever we can do, absolutely. And inclusionary zoning, again, meaning 25% is not for affordable, it's for deeply, truly affordable housing. But I think there is so much we could do with zoning as well, and it's something I've tried to raise. We are actually, people talk about Toronto being overwhelmed with development, but what we are overwhelmed with is skyrise towers and stable neighborhoods. And we call it stable neighborhoods because it sounds nice, but really it's gated communities supported by the city. We've got areas of single-family lots that you cannot make into a duplex, that you cannot make into a rooming house, that you cannot make into a sixplex, that you cannot add an accessory dwelling, which is like a coach house or laneway house. You can't do anything with it except for build a McMansion. That is a gated community we have without gates, and that's throughout Toronto. We're over 600 square kilometers of geography with 2.8 million people. Paris has, in comparison, about a sixth of that geography and 2.2 million people. We have a tremendous amount of land. If we unlock that land by allowing the zoning to change so that we can allow people to put in more housing, that will open up those stable neighborhoods to everybody, not just the people who can afford a single-family home. One other thing I was going to add was about municipal using city land, and we do have city land. It's a tremendous public asset. We can't just sell it off to the highest bidder. We can't just sell it off to a private developer. Municipal co-ops, we have some of the best housing in Toronto is from co-ops. We need to go the co-op route. We need to go the land trust route. That is what I would like to see our municipal land used for.
Thank you. And the last question from Emily, and we know that folks have appreciated the preamble, so we will ask the folks asking the question to just get to the question, yes? Oh, Emily feels that the question has been responded to. Anything to add? No? So thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I just want to add, really, we don't need to ask our politicians or candidates to come up with new ideas. We just want to ask them, are you going to actually follow through with the ones that we know that work? The solutions are there. Are we going to fund it? It's that simple. Thank you.
So because we are about social change and building social change movements, then we need to change as new circumstances present themselves. And this is what we've done. So we're inviting the other mayoral candidates, and I will call them up individually, but we'll begin with the other mayoral candidate who is in the room and who is sitting on stage, Dion Renee, to make her way, if you are able, or yes, right here, to engage the questions, to do a brief intro similar to others, and then to engage the questions. And a question I have for you, Dion, is I know you've been listening to the questions, so whether or not you want to just do a response or you want the individual questions asked again.
I welcome the community's questions. We should be engaged and inclusive.
Yeah, so we definitely will, but there were some predetermined questions that we wanted to put to all of the candidates.
Yes, I welcome them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, if you are about inclusivity, you know my name already. It's Dion Renee. I am your Toronto mayoral candidate. You haven't heard about me in the media because that's on purpose. I'm a person who's interested in ensuring that we all have the ability to live and thrive. And if we say we're progressive, then be progressive. If we say we're inclusive, then be inclusive. If we say we're about centering issues of housing and homelessness, that's what we need to do. It's not about amplifying the candidacy, but in amplifying the crisis that we're in currently, and that is housing. The crisis that we're in right now, and that is homelessness. And yet still, they have not been appropriately addressed. I want you to pay attention to this table. The names that were sitting at this table were directed by Jennifer Keesmack to get up and leave, and they left. Does that even make sense? Why would you leave when a status quo candidate tells you to get up and leave? You're just following the status quo. If we're about to do something progressive, then be progressive. My platform is the most progressive, inclusive, accessible, viable, and innovative platform out there. We've heard a lot of it already because it's been appropriated by many candidates. The co-ownership of properties, which means the City of Toronto and you can own property together. That allows people to get in on the housing market. How do we do that? If we agree that the CBC and the Toronto Star are accurate, that means there are 8,000 houses or homes, units that are now defunct, not in use. Why are they just sitting there? They're assets that can be turned into housing, so let's turn it into housing. And how we do that? We do that by inclusionary measures. The brother mentioned inclusionary measures. I want to get to that when you get to direct your question, but this was kind of the opening to tell you a little bit about who I am. But specifically, I want you to go online and look at my name. My first name is spelled all uppercase letters, D exclamation mark, O-N-N-E. It's literally like that on your ballot. It's number 28. If you don't remember my name, know that it's the one with the exclamation mark. That's all you need to know because I'm always advocating, fighting for, with, and on behalf of our rights, to protect our interests and our rights, to ensure that we all have the ability to live and thrive. Thank you.
And now we will take a series of questions from the floor. So Taylor, and we can get to the questions because we have had the preamble.
Hi, Dion. Hi. What concrete policy directions will you provide to address the shelter crisis and prevent people from entering or re-entering shelters? And how will you present the issues of homelessness to the public in a way that avoids scapegoating and engenders a compassionate and inclusive response?
Exactly. It starts first with mindset. Too many things that we do in government just excludes people. We don't start with a mindset of compassion and inclusion. My platform is all about community wellness and inclusion. I've been saying that throughout this candidacy. How do we get to community wellness? Community wellness is not a silo thing. It's a whole picture. Looking at the whole picture, how do we incorporate various needs that helps people to be where they need to be so they feel that they have the ability to live and thrive? When we're looking at homelessness specifically, I know that there are many people in the room here that we've worked together to help people to get shelter and housing. And I know that there are many steps that are included in that, including the need of compassion. I believe that we need to implement into our policies and procedures certain things that are not involved at all in policy making. That's compassion competencies, inclusion competencies, cultural competencies, and competencies that make sure that people actually feel like they're getting access to services. We're not assisting people to get into housing in the way in which we could assist people because we're not patient with them. There's an expectation out there that homeless people are poor, or are drug users, or are people that are, quote, as somebody said earlier, this is a crazy event. This is not language we should be using. We should be using language that is actually focused on the wellness of society. So how we do that is actually starting with the mindset. And then when we do that with government, we're the example of what a livable city is.
Thank you. Greg.
So you heard the preamble. There's funding that goes to Toronto Community Housing for rent subsidies, but there's no sustainable recipe. There's a big spike of funding right now for repairs, but there's no multi-year plan. What's your plan for sustainable funding for Toronto Community Housing?
Well, first and foremost, and I said it when I ran in 2014, we're not assessing numbers. And this is why on my platform you see that I talk about reallocation of resources. This is fundamental in order to know how we should be directing our resources. And when you're looking at Toronto Community Housing, there's again an exclusionary measure. People lumping them into a group and saying they and them, and they're part of community. The bigger picture is they're part of the community. So why are we excluding people in this fashion? If we set up our rental housing to go towards income, so all the units the City of Toronto owns, by the way, we're the largest landlord holder in all of Canada. If we set up our rental housing that specifically, we actually keep it rent geared to income, then we really solve a lot of problems that people face in their housing. But instead, we follow the Residential Tenancies Act that allows people to be wildly coyote with how they charge for rent. I think we need to bring back that, and I think the City of Toronto can actually be an advocate with the province to ensure that there is rent geared to income that is implemented and mandated into the policies. But moreover, that what we need to do with some of the properties with Toronto Community Housing, again, is through my housing plan, which I use a hashtag, it's JPOP Toronto. So that's hashtag J, P as in Paul, O, P as in Paul, Toronto. Look it up, a lot of the information is there. And of course I use YouTube as my platform because it's inclusionary. It allows closed captioning for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and it allows audio for people who are blind or low of vision. Well, that's a problem for me to hear. That's a problem for me to hear.
Sister.
So I would agree with you, brother. Who is the mayoral candidate that's being stopped by the police? So is Faith Goldie an inclusive? Is Faith Goldie an inclusive person?
So we have a question coming to you, Dion. Yes?
Sister Dion.
Yes.
Inclusionary zoning.
Yes,
How would
brother.
you make sure that developers put that in their plan?
Thank you for asking.
If you can just please just respect the speaker to be able to hear. So we have opened the process to have folks speak. Can we have Sister Dion respond, please?
The problem always exists when you elect people who are not there to serve the public. We have access to implement inclusionary measures, but we don't. Why? In the last election in the last council we had 44, I'm prepared to debate anybody who's reasonable about debating. I'm welcome to that. That were elected to council and they did not implement the mandatory inclusionary measures in new development. So when I say to you, why do we elect and re-elect the same people who are not doing the job that you expect them to do? You have to ask yourself, why do we do that? Why do we allow labor councils and whoever to direct us as to what we should think? Why aren't people taking actions to investigate things for themselves and be rightly informed? The point is, inclusionary measures are there. They're just not being implemented by council. And you need to elect people who are actually progressive and who will do it. It has nothing to do with courage and everything that has to do with being hired, elected, empowered to do a job.
Thank you. Hi there.
Hi.
So, I'm going to do no preamble, and so can you commit to bringing the city's definition of affordable housing in line with the provincial and federal definitions, which are tied to income rather than market rent?
Yes. So the federal definition, because some people are saying there's no definition of affordable housing. Yes, there is. The federal government has made a definition. The definition is if you're paying affordable housing is considered to be 30% or less of your total household income before taxes. That's what's considered to be affordable housing. I don't use that term, affordable, because it is a relative term. We do have an example that the government uses when it gives its definition, but I say we should be calling on the government to identify housing as a right, to make that legislation, and not just talk, but actual legislation under the Human Rights Code of Canada, and under also our, when you're looking at the, what is the other one, the Canadian, Charter. Thank you, the Charter, so that people are not discriminated against in getting housing. The other problem that we have with regards to the definitions that we keep failing to include accessibility. Many properties are not accessible, so people are actually shoved to certain corners of the city in order to live. And that's not being inclusive, that's not being part of the community, that's being exclusive. So when we look at big pictures, we need to look at accessible housing, because I believe that definition is a true definition of the type of housing that we need. And if housing is a right, then let's make it a part of legislation.
Thank you. And the final question from me.
So if you were elected mayor, how would you use the next year, 2019, to mobilize Toronto's resources, including land, money, borrowing capacity, zoning, and regulatory tools to increase Toronto's affordable housing supply? And how would you know you were on the right track?
Yes. So again, I'm using the term accessible housing. Language is everything, and again, mindset, language, all these things are important. When you go online, you'll see my plan. There was a sister on Twitter who asked me the question about how do we do my plan of joint property ownership, JPOP Toronto. It really, if anybody watches HGTV, you know that the Property Brothers can build, renovate a broken down house within 7 to 8 weeks with a great team. What a great way to increase jobs in the city of Toronto by focusing on, like Saran said, focusing on making it a priority to get these houses built. We incorporate the schools, the post-secondary schools that are already doing construction. We create apprenticeship opportunities for them. We create, and I'm talking about those 8,000 units that are not being used at all that we should turn into habitable spaces. We actually will allow for people to feel that we are actually thinking about that. I think 8,000 houses, literally, if we do it HGTV style, can get accomplished within 5 months. I really do. If we allow to hire the staff that we need to do that. Now, when you ask about how do we afford it, it goes back to reallocation of services. Just simply looking at the Sunshine List. How many people do we pay out of our pockets over $100,000 to be in City of Toronto employees? The Toronto Police Services budget is over $1.3 billion. That fund can be reallocated. Some of that money can be reallocated into housing. TTC, you've got a lot of people who are staff employees, again, making $200,000, $300,000. We need to cut some of those wages to make sure that we can actually do the things that the city needs. That means accessibility. That means housing. That means transit that's reliable, available, and ready to take people from A to B and fare-free. My fare-free transit plan is #FareFreeTTC. It's all there. We can do this. We're elected to do things to ensure that people have the ability to thrive. So then let's just get it done. That's as simple as that. For those of you who are in this room or listening who don't see how it can be done, move out of the way and let the rest of us who see how it can be done get it done.
Thank you, Thank you. So we have 2 other candidates in the room that that I will ask to join us here to make a statement around their candidacy, their commitment to the issues of affordable housing and the responding to the issue of the homelessness crisis in the city. So I'm going to ask Nia Singh to join me and to make a statement and to respond to some of the issues that you've heard that you believe you can respond to in this particular role. And Mayor, for others who may not know, is a Toronto lawyer and was one of the early pioneer advocates around anti-corruption.
Thank you very much for allowing me a chance to speak today. I came here with not the intention of being able to present to this forum because I was not one of the invited candidates, but I have this opportunity. But it's very important that we recognize that a lot of ideas come from different candidates, and to be only limited to 2 candidates throughout a 35 mayoral race is very much not a democracy. So as we sit here believing we live in a democracy, we have to understand that it's only through your pressure that things are going to change. So just for my background in history, I'm 44 years old, I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and at the age of 19, I started and ran a recording studio for 20 years. At the age of 36, I went back to university to obtain a degree, and then recently got called to the bar from Osgoode Hall. Thank you. I'm running for mayor because I believe the city needs somebody who understands all social classes, all cultures, and embraces the diversity of Toronto. And for too long, we've been seeing that certain communities are marginalized, they're excluded from employment, they're kicked out of educational institutions, and I think from my experience, working with people like that, being at the receiving end of that discrimination, I'll be able to assist our city in reconciling those differences and understanding how to treat each other fairly. What I will say about homelessness, and it's something that troubles me every day, I've seen a huge increase in homelessness in the city. And I'm sure you all do, especially when you walk around the downtown core. As I go to Old City Hall in the mornings, I always see somebody sleeping on a grate in front of there. And I always wonder, why aren't our paramedics and our mental health professionals engaging with people who are suffering? And I believe that our city needs a mental health task force that will go around and engage those people. I can tell you a story about a good friend of mine who is of Anishinaabe and Cree heritage. And when I used to work at the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto, teaching poetry to young people, he was a young person at the age of 15 who I took under my wing. And we worked together. We produced about 3 albums. And he was nominated for an Aboriginal Music Award and achieved some success. But over the years, things changed and he wasn't in the limelight anymore. Pressures got to him and some mental health issues started to occur. I assisted him with his case, and when I had him, when he was released, he could not find a place to stay. And I took him to the Native Canadian Centre and asked for them to look for a shelter for him. All the shelters were full. I ended up taking him to Avenue Road, just north of Bloor. And again, all the shelters were closed. I ended up taking him to my house for 2 weeks to stay. But what does that tell you about a city that has a $13 billion budget and can't find a place for one of the indigenous residents of our city to stay overnight?
Shame.
It's shame. It's shame. And what I can tell you this, if I were to be elected mayor, it's not going to be only my decision to make these improvements that we talk about today. It's going to take someone who can work with council and convince council to vote on those important measures that allow us to make the changes that we need to make. So this is not about promises made by mayoral candidates. This is about the ability to work with all levels of government. Our provincial government and our federal government must contribute more to this economic hub of this country. As we know, Toronto generates the most amount per capita in this country, and we deserve the respect that we have earned. Thank you.
And I'll invite the other mayoral candidate who is in the room, Chris Langenfeld, to make a statement.
Thank you. Good evening. I think I'd like to touch on what Nia mentioned there about the formats here of these debates, and I'd like to point out, when we have people like Faith Goldie and other people that want to espouse racist theories, we can't shout them down because that just leaves them shouting out in the quiet amongst themselves. We need to bring them into these forums and point out the flaws in their logic. It's a lot easier to deal with them if we're actually addressing the people and pointing out how stupid some of their ideas are, rather than letting them quietly speak with people that are shouting in the crowd here. I think well, fair enough. I think part of the issue here is we have to look at who's capable of actually leading this city moving forward here. We have people like Jennifer Keesmaat and John Tory that basically Keesmaat gave Tory the ideas and Tory ran with most of them. And we're not going to have any change with either of those two getting in power. But when we look at a lot of the other candidates here, they may have some good ideas, and I'm certainly happy to hear from a lot of them on housing and homeless issues, inclusion, and those are certainly a lot of things that we have to address. But there's a lot more to running a city than that. And I can tell you, if somebody has a background of 2 decades as an accountant and designing financial systems and business systems and doing consulting work, I'm prepared and capable of actually dealing with the city and with all the different groups, the unions, the police, the different third-party organizations that currently do a lot of the work. And when we talk about building housing, the reality is the most of the affordable housing is going to have to be built by the private sector. The city is never good at building. When you look at when government does projects, we can do certain large government projects, but they invariably go way over budget. They cost a lot more than the private sector ever does for the same work. And we can't afford to build all the housing that this city needs for all the people. So instead, we have to manage by setting rules and requirements in zoning. When we're permitting buildings, we have to have that 5 to 10% of the units have to be designed so that they will become city-managed units, and those will be social assistance housing. Then we have to look at what plans are we approving when we're designing these buildings and we're allowing these condos to be built. We have to be telling developers that if they want to get approval from city council, that they're going to have half of those units in there be smaller, less elaborate, less ostentatious places that people are able to afford. There's certainly a fact that you have to pay for what you get in life. We all tend to know that when we buy the things ourselves. If we want the fancier things, we're going to pay more money. And so if we're expecting that everybody's going to have housing, then we can't necessarily have everybody living with a large kitchen, a large living room, 2 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms or something like that, which unfortunately a lot of particularly the older social housing buildings are. So for those units, we need to look at converting some of them as we move forward. We need to be designing what we're building so that it can be affordable for all the people out there, so that there are, as we mentioned, okay, 20 seconds. I think it comes down to somebody has to be there who's able to listen to what the people have to say, and that is something that I'm prepared to do. And I think if you look at my history of dealing with the Police Services Board, you'll see that I am out there fighting for people's rights and listening to what society needs. Thank you.
And because we are continuing to build inclusion and respond to what is happening in the room, I also just want to acknowledge that we have with us here this afternoon Ahmed Aminan, who is Consul General for the state of Eritrea, who is in the room and engaging us and looking at our process. So I hope that you are here, and I think I've been asked by Salome to do that acknowledgement and do that graciously, and thank you for being in the room with us as we twist and turn to create space for folks to have a voice. So in that twisting and turning for folks to have a voice, I call on the last mayoral candidate who is in the room, Chai Kelvar, and many of you will know him as a labor activist and attendee at every social justice rally and demonstration in the city. So welcome to the stage, and remember, I will keep you to time.
Thank you for that generous introduction. I must say, firstly, my name is Chai Kaliwal, so let's get that right. So you can say hi Chai.
Hi Chai.
Or you can say bye Chai.
Bye Chai.
And if that doesn't work, you can even say chow Chai. And one thing you must remember, I am the chai no one can drink. Anyway, enough about my name. But it's important that you remember the name when you go to vote. Let me point out, we are so proud of our democracy. My God, we do so many things. But let's remember, this democracy is a democracy of one species. This planet belongs and was born with many species. And many other species are going extinct. What about their housing? They are going extinct and we are doing nothing about it, and we are saying we want more. This planet is being consumed by cities, by urban areas, because we are gobbling up the planet, leaving nothing for the other species. And they are going extinct. And I suggest, as compassionate human beings and Torontonians, we must include the other species in our housing strategies. Do you want to have a planet where only men and women run around? No elephants, no lions, no whales, no sharks. Kill them all! We want to build cities. Is that what we want? Not me. I think we have got to start rationalizing our greed. We have been brought up with greed, and now it is meeting the limits of the planet's finiteness. Planet is finite. Our greed is infinite. We have got to learn to shape it down. If we can't, well, the planet is going where it is going. If you heard the United Nations report that came 2 days ago, we won't have a planet to get food from in our care of a fear. When I went to school as a young man, they told me north of Arctic Circle is all ice and snow. And only a few months ago we heard there was a forest fire north of Arctic Circle. Forest fire north of Arctic Circle. Aren't you sleeping or what? Wake up to the realities of the planet. I cannot imagine going north of the Arctic Circle and forest fire. And in Vancouver, people were rubbing their eyes because of the smoke from the smoke emergency in BC. We had 100 forest fires north of Ontario. How long will it be before we start burning our eyes or rubbing them because the smoke is in your eyes and you can't see it? And personally, in terms of all the your eyes, we already have it, we don't see them. Thank you.
So you have heard from a number of the candidates who are running in this election, and And we have had one candidate who has ran from this room.
Yes.
Yes. And that is unfortunate, because democracy is a messy thing. It means that we may not get it right when we start, but we should work to get it more right than how we end. And therefore, sometimes we need to sit through the messiness of the struggle around finding a more balanced democracy. And we certainly had some of the rocky start at the beginning, but I am happy that you who are here have stayed here to hear those who have committed to being a voice for this city and to listen to them. You have heard from a number of candidates, and we have about 20 minutes remaining in the night. But we did ask for some questions from the floor. So I'm going to really keep it tight, yes? So I'm going to take 3 questions from the floor. And if you ask your question, I'm asking you to keep it to a question, not a statement. And if you have a candidate to whom you would like to direct that question, I'm asking you to do that as well. Yes? So I saw someone who's been sitting with, yes, with the burgundy shirt, definitely, yes. Because you have your hand up poised, and then there is 2 just behind each other there. So just right here, yes.
Yes, I'd like to ask my question to Ron. Is she here?
Yes. So Ron.
I was speaking to campaign manager Winter, and we were talking about the issues within TCHC and tenants in TCHC. And one of the issues that hasn't really been touched upon is the empowerment of the tenants. Because unfortunately, the tenants sort of are overlooked here in the case of managing our buildings and whatever. And we have Mayor Tory and Jennifer Keesmans, who has endorsed councillors who have supported this tenants, so-called tenants first in TCHC, that has taken away our tenants' rights. They selected specific tenants, not selected by us as tenants, to decide on issues of breaking up TCHC without any accountability mechanisms in place, and no transparency about how much money this is going to all cost. We want, and I'm a founder of SIT, Save, Improve TCHC. We demand a referendum vote to decide on these changes. For example, Jennifer Keesman has endorsed Joe Cressy. And my question is, can you please support our position where we want to empower the tenants and not take away our rights? And would you be able to support these issues that I've brought up? And also give TCHC the same amount of money per unit as nonprofits and co-ops, because we are lacking in that equity funding as well.
Thank you.
I stand completely in support of your proposal for a referendum. I think this is a great opportunity to do organizing. I would be remiss if I didn't say we are in a room full of good organizers who've been organizing in Toronto for decades in many cases. So yes, I will, yes, absolutely. So I think what the message I want to get across to what you're asking is, I really want us to take advantage of the room we have tonight to spark a fire in people, to mobilize. Not just for the election, but well beyond that. And yes, I will support a referendum.
Second question.
Hi, good evening. First of all, I want to thank you, everyone who stayed. We really appreciate your bravery. My question is very brief. We heard a lot about affordable housing, but one of the challenges to affordable housing is above guideline increases. We have like a lot of investment companies that call themselves property management companies. In my building where I live at 12 Bader, we're facing a 14.1% AGI by Achilles Canada. They're not the only one. They're second in line for AGIs. Many investment companies, Timber Creek, Metcalf, they've been pushing for above guideline increases. And what I haven't heard from the campaign, either provincially nor federally, and I'd like to hear from all the candidates, how are you going to advocate for affordable housing and fight against above guideline increases? Because people like myself, as well as other people, are being pushed to the edge. And I'm at a point where I don't know, I love this city, I don't know how long I can live here. Imagine someone on ESP, imagine someone's pension. As people said, this is not a livable city, I want to hear advocacy. So how are you, any of you can answer this, address fighting against above guideline increases, which makes it difficult for working class people to live? Thank you.
So as I mentioned when I was speaking, I did talk about empowerment. The reality is that the people always have the power to elect representatives who will actually do the job that they're elected to do, and that is to protect your rights and interests. And we will never get there by electing people who have no interest in that, who are parachuted in, who are highly financed to get a lot of airtime, who have no interest in you. When you're asking how do we do that, the City of Toronto can be an advocate for the people living in Toronto. We can also set the example of what we do in maintaining rent geared to income and mandating that in all the units that we hold. Again, we're the largest landlord in the city in Canada. So when we say something, as much as people hate on us, we actually set the tempo for how things go. We're going to have a tough next 4 years. And do you want a candidate that's willing to run from adversity, from challenges, from anything that seems to be a little bit awkward and unusual to their natural experience? Or are you going to want to elect a candidate like me, who's not afraid of withstanding adversity or the fear or threat of the police, and to know that together we succeed? We do that through community involvement, and I ask every person here or listening somewhere else or reading it on the screen, are you not tired of marching and fighting and advocating and campaigning? The whole role of being tired is because we keep electing the people that are not doing the jobs we elect them to do. The point starts with you, me, and everyone else. And as I say, together we succeed. We've got to stop drinking the Kool-Aid and following what people tell you to do and do things that protect your own rights and interests. We have to stop working against our interests. And that's where it starts. It always starts with us. You've heard me tonight. You go out and tell people there is a mayoral candidate interested in protecting our rights and interests. Her name is Dion Renee. Thank you.
So, and then we come to the city.
Yes, there's a great campaign that's calling for a across-the-board rent freeze, a complete moratorium on rent hikes, and that's a campaign that I believe we can all get behind and mobilize behind that. I've also called for increased legal clinics, pop-up legal clinics, because what we have is a lot of evictions, and we have a lot of people who are being forced into the landlord-tenant bureaucracy through the tribunal, and they need support.
I would just have 2 parts of the answer. One is how do we advocate? It's by bringing you people into the room. It's by bringing the Federation of Tenants into the room with the mayor, with the city, to advocate to the province and the federal government. So it's not to kind of filter the message, it's to give it directly and give people a voice. But the second thing is, as long as there's no housing in the city, landlords are going to find a way to crowd us out, to raise rents beyond what they're possible. So yes, absolutely we have to stop that, but we have to get more housing. That's why they can jack up the rents like this. That's why the renovations happen. That's why these illegal rent increases happen, because they can get away with it. So we need to increase the housing. It's as simple as that. Thanks.
Thank you. So we have 2 final questions that we take. There is a question down in the middle, and then there's a question at the top. Sorry, my brother. Right now? No. That question right there, yeah? Thank you. And remember a question. Sorry.
I've got a question. I'm a qualified construction project manager, union carpenter. I've been building for over 40 years. What I want to hear from the candidates, now that we've all pretty much as a city and as a province and as a country decided that we have to finally deal with this 40-year neoliberal increase in the price of real estate that is completely unrealistic. I can build houses that for the same cost we were doing 20 years ago. So what's new? So I want to know from the candidates. We have designed a house in the United States where I was living for the last 30 years that comes up with it's a 3-bedroom house, it comes up with no utilities. We built these houses, affordable housing, for people on Martha's Vineyard. They cost nothing to run except the water utility. There's solar on the roof, hot water solar, heat pump for the other off days of hot water needs. I want to know, will you support, if we build a ton of affordable housing, will you support the concept of 3, 2, 1-bedroom homes that will be built with the idea that they will cost nothing to run? Except the water.
I think
we've already built them.
Yes.
They're 10 years old.
I mean, we need innovative housing solutions like the ones you're talking about, and to me the biggest barrier is I would support the kinds of solutions that you're talking about, the kinds of construction that you're talking about, and to me the biggest barrier in innovative housing solutions, in whether it's a tiny home, whether it's pop-up housing, all the different ways that we can house people rapidly and at low cost to maintain are constrained by our zoning. And so we need to again move in the same direction as our talk. And right now our talk is here, our funding is way there, and our zoning is over here. So if we align those, then we can take advantage of the innovative solutions that other people are proposing.
Yes, hi. So my question is for the organizers. Why were you not ready for the disruptions? They've literally been there at every other debate. So you've let them drive away over half the audience in one of the debaters.
So I won't take the time away from asking questions of the candidates, but I can certainly come to connect with you after.
May I just say that I'm not answering on behalf of the organizers. I'm not an organizer.
Sorry, Dion.
Yeah.
Can I just have?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'd like to hear what Saron has to say about the...
Yes, I'll come back to Saron as well. Saron, yes. Do you want to respond?
No, we will. Of course, I will support that kind of a position. I want to build off of what you were saying. I want to take the opportunity to mention as well in this conversation that right around the corner, John Tory is, as we speak, proposing to have legislation enacted that will bar anyone that may have had a record from applying to Toronto Community Housing Corporation, and I hope we will all come out vigorously against that. Yeah, absolutely, I see some nodding heads. This is a very regressive and dangerous move, and we can already see what the fallout will be. There will be significant consequences. So one of my main takeaways for the night is, please, when you're organizing and when you're doing work around this, please let's make sure that we reverse any trend of that nature and that we do not permit that kind of legislation to go through.
Thank you very much to the organizers and all the candidates. Please put your hands together for all the candidates who come here and the weather outside as well. My name is DeWitt Lee. I'm speaking on behalf of the Black voter base. And for those who don't know, the UN in 2015 announced that it's the decade of people of African descent. And so on behalf of the black voter base, I'd like to find out if the candidates are willing to commit to put pressure on the developers who are allocating certain percentages of their housing units for those with to create affordable income, with 20% by 2020 go to those of African and indigenous descent.
So brother, I wanted to acknowledge your question. It's fundamental. It's on my platform. My platform, again, is inclusive. The brother who asked about solar technology, that too is on my platform. We're never going to have solutions if we do it in piecemeal measures. We have to come with it all. So the way to go in the future is here. Solar technology reduces costs and expenses. Creating units that allow for rental incomes that are rent geared to income and fixed income by the City of Toronto, while the person upstairs lives and owns, also allows for a mortgage to be paid down through my joint ownership plan. Making sure that there are communities who've often been left out of home ownership. Indigenous brothers and sisters, our black community members, new immigrants who want to buy but for some reason are excluded from neighborhoods. All of these things we can do as a city to mandate. Again, it comes back to you. You empower your vote, your voice, and your rights to be protected by the people you elect. All of this always comes back to you. So take some ownership about what you do with your vote on Election Day on October 22nd. And in relation to the comment that was made earlier, again, I don't speak on behalf of the organizers, but I want to say, it is always the responsibility of the candidate who's running an election what they will do to ensure that we all have the ability to live and thrive. If you run from being addressing a group, that's on you. That has nothing to do with the organizer. But if you do what I did to make sure that other candidates have the opportunity to be heard tonight, then that's the way we should be doing elections. I'm never going to allow sophistry and white supremacy to direct how we do anything. We have to end patriarchy and the status quo. And all we've been doing right now, when you see people on the news or in media, none of them have called it out. And that's what keeps up this nonsense. We've got to change that. How we do it is like my sister Sigrid and my sister Sue Lynn, who backed me up, and others who came up here, Opie was here, people who backed me up and said, let her stay. And as a result, the crowd got encouraged and motivated to say, you know what, right, we're progressive. We're not professive progressives, we're actually progressive. So do the thing that you say you are, and we will be successful in what we're doing.
My sister, thank you. And the question to the other two candidates, if you choose to respond, around a commitment, I think the question was around a commitment of 20% of housing stock newly developed for Black and Indigenous community members. I think that was...
That is the question.
And I answered it, I said yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I want, every part of my platform is research, so I'm not opposed to it. I would like to talk to you about it and make sure that it absolutely makes sense, but 100% it needs to be inclusive. Economically marginalized populations are usually racialized and indigenous, so we have to benefit, we have to make sure our policies are not penalizing the economically marginalized, and that we do address the inequity that's happening in Toronto. So I'm sorry that I can't answer quite yes or no to that specific question, just because I want to talk to you more about it, but absolutely there's inequity in Toronto. It's not being addressed, and we have to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have come to the end of this conversation, but certainly not an end to the conversation about the issues. The issue of homelessness, the issue of the lack of affordable housing in the city in the face of gross condominium development that is of the luxury and high income earning types. I will ask the candidates who are here and who wish to give me and to give us a 1 minute closing comment. 1 minute closing comment. And we'll begin with Zoe.
In 1 minute, before there's an exodus from the room, I agree democracy is messy, but I have to thank not only the organizers, but the members of my team who came from Ajax and Scarborough and Regent Park and first-time voters. If you can please give yourself a round of applause. months. We have just 1 week until election day, and we are in the streets in every neighborhood improvement area. We know that this machinery can be defeated, which I've said again and again. And I was just saw John Tory not too long ago on the agenda, and he said when we first started out, he was polling at 3%, and then we saw a meteoric rise, and that is an indication that that machinery is beatable, and we will beat it together in the coming
Really, I just want to close by thanking you all. Thank you very much for coming and listening and for caring enough to get involved and to demand answers from the candidates. It's so important, and that's the only way we're going to get change. And I just wanted to talk about addressing some of the systemic problems that lead to this inequity and you know, the exclusivity that leaves out racialized communities. And it's a big part of our voting system. We don't have ranked ballots, and ranked ballots, you know, let you vote for your first, second, and third choice. We absolutely need that. It's proven that it helps communities of different who are left out from traditional political areas. And until we have our city hall, especially after this election, is not going to look anything like this room. And it needs to look like this room. We need to reform voting so that it does look like this room, and then maybe we'll get some changes that actually help everybody, not just one segment of the population.
The underrepresented would always be underrepresented as long as we maintain the status quo. And the establishment maintains the status quo. I'm asking you to check out my platform. It is the best platform. It's under, again, D!O!N!E, Dion Renee. And I also want to say a quote from Ronaldo Walcott. So that's Professor Ronaldo Walcott. This is his building, Boise, that we're in. And he said this on the agenda. He said, I have a radical utopian democratic view of how we might be able to live together better in the future. And I concur, because I have that same view. And how we get there is with your vote. It's never going to be by maintaining the status quo, it's by your vote. You see how I'm fighting for you here, and I've always done, Google me, you'll see, that's what I do. The reality is that I'm tired of fighting, and I'm sure you are too. So on election day, be sure to elect a candidate that is actually going to protect your rights and interests and has demonstrated inclusivity, because together we succeed.
I'd just like to say, when we look at affordability of housing, it comes down to supply. If there's not enough houses out there, pricing is going up. One of the things we need to do is deal with the inefficiency in management of this city that's preventing a lot of the building from taking place. Delays in zoning, delays in inspections, there's all kinds of problems there. I've worked in carpentry, I know a lot of the issues that are involved in that, and it comes down to better management than John Tory in order to improve all of our situation in both housing and a lot of areas. So I hope you'll take a look at my policy at mayorchris.ca, and you'll be able to see that it's I've given it a lot more thought than I was able to spell out to you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello guys. I'm number 16 on the ballot.
Shall I see your minutes going by?
Okay. One thing I didn't tell you guys in the last few minutes I got is I am an author of a book called Climate Change in the Nuclear Age. I talked a little bit about climate change. Let me tell you, we are not too far from Pickering. 50-year-old chuckling along nuclear station. When it will blow up like Fukushima, I do not know. And if it does, next day or two, we will not have drinking water to drink from Lake Ontario. And that is a problem nobody wants to talk about. But that is a risk here, because Fukushima has not been fixed after 7 years, and we are toying with an unfixable technology right at our doorstep. It's stupid, It's risky. We must get out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to thank all of the mayoral candidates who have engaged us, engaged you, and who have stuck through this process. The ability to still be here, to still be in conversation with community about this important issue, given where we started, and we all like a sanitized process. But I believe that when we are working for social change, we need to be prepared for messiness. And we need to be prepared to turn around and go back and come back again. And in Jamaica, we have a thing about wheel and come again. And that is what we have done. We have turned around, we have come back, and we have still continued to have this conversation, because while we continue to have, as we leave here this evening, you will pass subways, you will pass bus stops, you will pass rest stations, you will pass city grids, and you will see homeless folks. And that should alarm you. That should alarm you. And that should say to you that you need to vote for a candidate who will make a difference in those conditions. The fact that just last week, as I said, we had an advertisement that advertised a 200 square foot space as a micro suite for $1,600 in Parkdale should alarm us, and we should vote for that to change. So I always say at election time that many people have died fighting for the right to cast a ballot. Some people have been conscientious objectors to voting, and particularly voting in a system that folks feel have never historically represented them and or represented their interests. So those two things are in the balance as well, and those two things are true. But if you are able to vote, please vote, because every vote counts. So I thank Sarone, I thank Sarah, I thank Dion, I thank Nia, I thank Chris, and I thank Chai for risking in this democracy project to be a representative for us. And for thanking them as well for coming here to speak to your perspectives and to share that with us. And I invite you, as you leave, to remember what they have said, to think on what they have said. Some of you are researchers, you will go and Google more, so go and Google. And make a choice, but make a choice, because we want to be able to have a government leading the city and a mayor leading the city that will defend homeless folks in this city and that will create truly affordable housing. Thank you. And thank you to the organizers for pivoting as we did this. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.